Hello and welcome back to all the young activists, students, and leaders across the globe. My name is Sahar Mohammed Zeta, and I am a 20-year-old young explorer at the National Geographic Society and a student at Harvard. Thank you all so much for joining us yet again for our third session of Gen Geo Careers in Exploration, which is part of our summer learning series. This program is brought to you for young people by young people and emphasizes National Geographic's belief that we, Gen Geo, are the key to addressing the world's most pressing problems. And that's because this generation of citizens, we dare to think critically in order to collaborate globally. And we're all on our way towards becoming informed leaders, decision makers, and most importantly, champions of our planet. But the million-dollar question is, how are we able to convert that fire and passion into a sustainable and fulfilling career? And to help you on your journey to change the world, I'll be sharing a behind the scenes look at the inspiring careers and individuals who bring National Geographic's mission to life. So joining me will be none other than National Geographic's very own experts, scientists, educators, storytellers, you name it, who will share their pathways that have ultimately led them to change the world. So we are already in July, so do not wait another second. Make sure to mark your calendars from now on to join National Geographic and me live every Tuesday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. So previously on the series, we've talked to scientists that dare to study large carnivores up close. We've talked to teachers that have revolutionized the way we think about standardized schooling. And this week, our guest is just as, if not more, inspiring. When I introduce her, you'll see why it is so difficult for me to contain my excitement. So today's guest, Wasfia Nazreen, is known for being the first Bangladeshi and Bengali in the world to climb the 7 summits or the 7 highest mountain peaks of every continent. She has won numerous national and global awards for her activism and commitment to empowering women through the field of adventure. She was named by Outside Magazine as one of the 40 women in the last 40 years who had advanced and challenged the outdoor world through their leadership, innovation, athletic feats, and by Men's Journal as one of the 25 most adventurous women of the past 25 years. Wow. When it comes to exploring and climbing life's obstacles, both literally and figuratively, I just cannot imagine a more accomplished woman to talk to. So, Wasfia, thank you so much for joining us. It's quite the privilege.
Thank you so much, Zahra, for having me. And I'm so excited to get to have this chat today.
Oh, wonderful. Wasfia, I mean, I don't even know where to even begin. Your work and your accomplishments are so interdisciplinary, they're geographically diverse and globally impactful. I mean, would you be so kind to take the time to just tell us about your many experiences? What does your world look like?
Well, I hope first of all everyone's stay safe in the current pandemic world. So everyone's life is on hold right now, right? Currently, I live in Los Angeles, and before COVID started, actually, I was one of the first COVID patients in US back in March. So I'm gonna kind of run you through life before everything went on pretty much pause. I will start a little, it's not a presentation, it's just to show some clips about where I'm at and how life flows. Just let me know if you're able to see.
Looks wonderful.
Yeah. So usually on an in an ideal world, I wake up at 4 or 5 a.m. It's also very hard to summarize a 30, almost 38 years of life in such a short time. So I will just be giving key points of what drives me and, the turning points in my career. So whether your work or playing, whatever, I think everything starts from the mind. So I start my day training the mind. And that has been a practice for over 20 years now, from my late teen years to from my early 20s to now. I'm almost 40. And you will see when you see my journey how that has played out in my entire career. I start with a lot of gratitude and reflection and pumping my mental muscles and doing a lot of breathing work, because that's not only needed for the mountains, it's also needed whether you're walking into a crazy meeting with your boss, or giving a talk, or also with combining it with visualization. So I incorporate all those practices very early in the morning. I stay away from computer, laptop, checking Instagram and all that stuff for at least the first 2 hours of the day, because I think the more sensations we get from the outside world, it can really deplete our energy. And then I, set my intentions for the day, and I also keep my intentions in check in the morning. That am I on the right path? Am I doing it on the, really like question myself where I'm at, or am I getting distracted by something else? And then I repeat the entire practice, kind of before I go to bed, not so ritualistically, but at least mentally take notes that what have I learned from the day. And then I go to training, and I have a coach, and I train for 2 hours, and it varies from day to day. It can be anything from, yoga to weightlifting to doing a lot of breathing exercising and cardio work. In LA, it's very hard. The mountains that we hike to are not at all comparable to the Himalayas or the big mountains. So you have to like keep yourself in the practice every single day, and just, make sure that you maintain that stillness throughout all the hard work you do before I go off to my work as a producer, which I'll talk about later, which I'm currently doing or was doing before COVID. So throughout it all, the key point for me is to really be disciplined, because we can understand everything conceptually, but till we actually practice, whether it's mental work or physical work, we're not going to grow those habits in our minds. So, and that comes with anything in life. And, always being mindful that, everything literally starts from the mind. So just to give the audience a background where I grew up in a country called Bangladesh, in between India and Nepal. It's a tiny country of almost 170 million people, approaching. And if you see on the map on Google or wherever you want to check, by the time I was already 13, I lived in 3 different districts, which is most of Bangladesh. So Dhaka, Chittagong. Dhaka is the capital. Chittagong is in southeastern part, which has been kind of in the news recently because that's where the Rohingya refugees are coming in. And Khulna is in the southern part, which is my father worked in the shipping. So that's where Bay of Bengal, the largest delta on the planet, is, where also Sundarban is, where the Bengal tigers, famed Bengal tigers, live. So I had a very, exciting explorer, like not to the Western standard, but from my given background, I grew up with nature, like my dad worked in the shipping. I grew up in the Bay of Bengal for the first few years, were in Khulna. And I think um, that kind of was a seed of adventure and having to move so many times. But after 12, things, I lost all that. And it's a very long story for which you have to maybe someday read my book. But in short, my parents divorced. I lost my parents. I was shipped off to another city with an aunt. And I had to, from the age of 13, think about education, shelter, what's going to happen to my future. And those were the grounding years of my life, because had I not gone through those struggling years, I would probably not become who I am today. And back then, I had seen some of my cousins play the game Mario Brothers. Do you know about it? So that's when I felt like life is almost like a game of Mario Brothers. You gotta keep on keeping on, like no matter what's going on or what's coming out of this. So where I grew up kind of looked like this in Chittagong and Chittagong Hill Tracks. But then I was sent off to a completely different city life, concrete jungle, the capital, Dhaka. One of the most, so it was a huge shift for me at the age of 13. And then I had to go through a lot of changes in my education system, went from Bengali medium to studying all of a sudden in English medium. And I was living with my aunt and uncle. And even though these are very, they cared for me, I was still a guest. And I realized very early on that I was I had to set myself free. And there was no one else who could do it for me. And the only way to successfully, I say run away, because I was constantly at that time, and I can relate to a lot of younger people when I talk to that they're constantly trying to run away from the situation they're in. But the only way we can do that is get an education. And when I say education, I don't just mean like higher education. To me, and I was talking to Sarah about this earlier, is like, I really think you can learn so much through travel or service. It doesn't have to come through an educational system. So long story short, I ended up going to college, and then I was very lucky in my late teens and early 20s to come across a man who the world knows as His Holiness the Dalai Lama, but became kind of a parent in my life, and my teacher. And he changed my entire shift of life, um, till today, because I was at a very depressive, negative, not having parents, not having mentors to look up to. And then you end up working for someone. And I will talk more about how I ended up working, from college to going into Tibet and working with refugees. um, Basically, I got a small grant when I was in my final year for college, and I was studying how women in India were using art as therapy. And I ended up in a place called Dharamsala in northern part of India, studying how Tibetan women were forgiving their enemies through meditation. And that was kind of a slap on my face, because I was like, oh, I was so bothered about my sufferings and my obstacles, but look at these people. They don't have a home, they don't have their nation, their language has been taken, but they're still praying for their enemies. So that was a huge teaching. And at that time, I started working first as a journalist. Then I shifted to a development career, working for human rights and education, and working with 5 different nonprofits. And this is a turning point in my life when I really sat with myself, and I understood that we all have a purpose in life, and it has to be meaningful, and we come here for such a short time. Time flies, and we really need to make that time useful. And this is why I talk about intentions. It's like, if you don't sit with your motivation and intention of what you want to do and the importance of finding that intention in life, it can be very easy to get swayed, because life is full of distractions. And so if you have the right intention, then not no matter what comes, it can sway you away from your path. And this is also a time when I found my healing in nature. And in the Himalayas, the average altitude that we were living and working in was 5,000 to 6,000 meters. Usually mountaineers start their career like in smaller mountains, and then they end up in the Himalayas. I was lucky, I was fortunate, I just ended up in Himalayas for work, and as an activist, as a human rights worker. And so on a day-to-day basis, I was working with Tibetan and Sherpa people. I was traveling through Nepal. I was working with high altitude Sherpa people's rights, Nepal, Bhutan, the entire Himalayan belt, and northern India. And I got deported from Tibet by the Chinese government. That's a whole nother story. But just that those years were my founding years for climbing, because we would go over to 5,000, 6,000 meter peaks during weekends. Like people here go to bars, or because there's not much to do. And then I realized, or my Sherpa friends told me that you have really, knock on wood, I don't want to jinx it, conditioning skills, and you acclimatize at this altitude very well, so why don't you try higher mountains? So I just stumbled upon mountaineering. I actually never went to a mountaineering school. I learned from Sherpa people and the Western friends that I made through that community. And I just, it just got me going into high mountains, gave me a lot of healing with all my trauma from childhood. And that's something I did on the sideline while I was working in the nonprofit sector. But then fast forward to 2011, Bangladesh turned 40 years. And by this time, I was already settled back in Bangladesh. I was working with the nonprofit called Care. And I really wanted to do something big for Bangladesh from an international perspective, because whenever I would introduce my country or motherland when I traveled abroad, the first thing they would say, oh, you guys get a lot of floods, or oh, the poverty. And I was like, dude, we do have some good sides to our story, and one of the things that when I look back to, is all my aunts and the female stories. Like, I'm the second generation Bangladeshi, and there was a lot of positive Bangladeshi women stories that needed to be highlighted. So I put together this campaign called Bangladesh on Seven Summits, where I went out to climb the highest mountain of every continent, because it was a parallel journey to the struggle that women, not only in Bangladesh, but in general, face in all over the world. And on the screen, you can see the names of the mountains, and climbing all of them is called, it's a world record called the Seven Summits. And while I was doing it and in and out, I was taking, inspirations from the older the founding, some of the founding generations, from the government sector, nonprofit sector, from different NGOs. So just to show you that the work that I had done in my development sector and in my writing and journalism before that kind of added up to the campaign that I was already involved with. So um, while I was climbing, I was literally like climbing the mountain, coming in, and also continuing my work, to whether it was in education, whether it was to motivate, rural parts of Bangladesh, or and that was very technically very difficult, because I wasn't constantly focused on climbing the seven summits. I was also having to raise my funds and do a lot of hardship training. This photo was taken by Patrick Morrow, who many may know is the first person in the world who has climbed the seven summits. And he's a legend in our world. And his books were things that I read while I was in college. And I was actually sleeping with his book while I would sleep, so that I would dream about those adventures. I knew I couldn't afford those journeys, but somehow it's the power of visualization and dreaming and, putting intention, align my path in a way that when I started Seven Summits, a colleague of mine from the work that I had done in Tibet just sent me an email saying, hey, Pat lives next to me. Like, do you want to be introduced to him? And he would love to help you if you need any. I was like, are you kidding me? Of course I want to be introduced. So he reached out, automatically me and Pat grew, and his wife, Baiba Mora, we became close friends. And then I ended up training with him. This is actually his backyard in Canada. So I trained in western part of Canada, because going to some of the places in Seven Summits, for example, Antarctica, straight from Bangladesh wouldn't have worked because of the temperature. And this is a very environmentally friendly training, because I was cleaning a dumpster that Pat had on one side of the river. This is a frozen river. So he made me carry all those tires across the frozen river and dump it onto the side where, it would be taken away for proper recycling. I know everyone wants to hear about Everest, and me and we'll probably talk about it a little more later after I finish this presentation. So that's Everest. Locally, it's actually known as Chomulungma, which means Mother Goddess of the Universe. And that's in Tibetan, and in Nepali, it's called Sagarmatha, which means Mother of all ocean. So you can't point, but the black one is the black top, the rocky top, that's Everest. So another mission of me on these seven summits, you see the flag that you see is actually the liberation flag of Bangladesh, which is not used anymore, the 1971. So that's me in Camp 2 of Everest. And while I was, on this journey, Bangladesh, as I said, was going through the independence. So it automatically by default, made the campaign very big, because I guess it inspired a lot of youth and the older generation as well, and people found inspiration. But while that was going on, and I got a lot of inspiration from the people at home, I was having a mentally very I wouldn't say traumatic, but a very lonely journey, because as you can see on this big journey, some of these journeys took months. I was just alone with just one climbing partner sometimes, or just several. But in higher altitude, you don't, aside from the physical pressure of it. Mentally, you're dealing with death. I lost four of my closest friends in a fraction of 3 years. So I had to learn a lot in those 4 years. Um, but then come back down off the mountain, come back to Bangladesh and have to go back to work with women and girls and then inspire. And so I have to keep myself going. Um, Before I finish, I just wanted to show several key people in Everest, because when we hear about Everest, we don't hear about the people who actually carry our stuff. So this is Nima Girman Sherpa, who unfortunately passed later on. He's like my older brother, and this is Kusang Sherpa. I know the Sherpa community long before I even started climbing. So I actually have a home there that I don't have to pay rent for. So I feel like I'm a local. So I feel like when we go into remote places or in other people's territories, we really need to highlight their stories as well. This is a short clip from while me and Nima coming down. I want to show people that there's also the other side of Everest, which is not crowded. You can see the entire mountain. So, is the sound up? Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. That's Nima. We're coming down. We're done. This is after literally 2.5 months of being on the mountain. And you can see
Hi,
how
we're on the way to Camp 2 from Camp 3, and we're dying and thirsty.
there
We
was
just
no
came
water
down
for 2 days.
from over there and rappelled down, and that's the top of Everest. Sorry. That's the top of Everest.
So hypoxia
And
is a
we're
state
about
of
to
mind
go
that happens
way down there, you can't see.
when your brain's not getting enough oxygen. And
But it's a beautiful day outside.
you can also see Nima,
And with me
like
is Nima Jirme Shepa, my Shepa Siddhar.
badass climber who climbs through
Okay,
the ropes and
ciao for
oxygen,
now.
but he's looking into an empty water bottle looking for water. So that shows where your mind is at that level. I also want to show you some obstacles. This was a major obstacle, a frostbite finger that I got on Denali, which is the highest mountain of North America in Alaska. And this took me a recovery of 9 months, 7 surgeries, a lot of money, and a lot of pain. But whenever I hit a rock bottom throughout my journey, I had to remind myself that obstacles are only opportunities for huge transformations, and we cannot let obstacles bring us down, because deep growths, we wouldn't have deep growths and learnings without setbacks. And setbacks, the more setbacks comes in our life, like right now, like we are stuck in a situation, but we have so much time, deeper reflection time, we can learn so much online. These are all opportunities for us to grow. So that's a selfie, back before social media time, on the summit of Everest. When I was on the summit of Everest, I had no idea that when I would come down, things overnight, like I was there and I felt so connected, so grateful. And this is at a time I was only 29. Wow, that makes me feel old. So when I came down, everyone in my life literally came back in my life. And I not just like there in person, but just I started getting so much offers and, marriage proposals, advertisements, seriously, like from cement ads to food ads to like, it was just, I was on the front page of every single newspaper. And, fame is great, but also it's a huge distraction to our path, and I really have had to sit myself at that time to remind myself over and over again, is this what my path leading to? Because, you know, a lot of people, and I grew up around a lot of famous people, and I saw them like just lose it, get distracted and lose themselves. And fame is, I'm not saying fame is bad, but you have to have, be able to deal with it in a healthy way. So I made my own marriage proposal photo. This is a joke because in South Asia, you get a lot of marriage proposals based on your qualification as a career. But when I was doing 7 summits, people were saying you're never going to be married. But then after 7 summits, the fame itself got me so many marriage proposals. So it's like, this was my joke back to them. Um, so anyway, long story short, I used that however you want to call it, fame, the platform I had gained to start a foundation called USIL. That work started out in Bangladesh and Nepal. Currently, it's closed, and the idea was to help marginalized women from, especially starting from adolescent level, to help them find their inner self through outdoors activities and mindfulness practices. And this is actually an Geo education funded project that we carried out in the Bay of Bengal area. This is another group called Ad Astra that joined us on that project. But as we started, we realized that young youth, regardless of their gender, needed that help, and gender equality comes from, needs both all genders. And so we now, from last year, started, this mentorship program with youth. I don't think we have time for this video, but we can take some question answers after this. And so in a post-COVID world, the foundation would be open for youth as well, from like all genders, not just for girls. This is also the area that I grew up in. I think that's about it. Can you hear me?
Wow, I am absolutely speechless. I mean, what to talk about first, what to cover? I think first off, I just have to thank you. It was so inspiring to learn about so many ways that you've devoted yourself to exploring, but also along the way, breaking down those systematic barriers and the international impact that you've had. And most importantly, the way you've empowered and continue to encourage others to join your movement. I mean, before we hop into our discussion though, Wasfia, I would love to hear from those of you joining internationally. So please share your thoughts by tagging at @NatGeoEducation or use the hashtag GenGeo on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, or whatever social media platform you prefer. Be sure to submit any questions you have for us through the chat, and we'll address them as they're submitted. But Wasfia, I think it'd be an understatement to say that I was thrilled to hear that you were joining us. I mean, personally, I think it's difficult to motivate myself to get up in the morning and go to the gym, let alone decide to climb summits. I think those are very different obstacles. When was it that you decided you wanted to devote your life to this plan? Was this a realization that you had over time? Was there an aha moment? Was it pivotal? And maybe we can take this time to talk a little bit more about Everest as well and the significance it had for you.
Well, when you mean path, you mean climbing, or just
well, both. What led you to climb these summits?
Well, I touched base a little bit on that, but I think for me, I was very fortunate when I say, that's why I shared the earlier childhood part, is like I didn't plan it out. I didn't set out, oh, I'm going to be a mountaineer and I'm going to climb, I just became one because also, now I work as an expedition leader for not just for big mountains, but I curate journeys for, various different groups, whether corporations or women's groups, adolescents. I take them back to nature to help them connect with themselves and Mother Earth and find a purpose, a bigger purpose. And through all that work, I realized more and more had that, I was lucky in a way to see how short life is when I was so young. And that kind of gave me the fire, because I was a completely different person when before my parents' divorce took place. And I realized that, it takes, and then, I've been in earthquakes, I've been in avalanches. It takes a second for everything that we take for granted to go away. And that realization, I think itself drove me to constantly drive myself like Mario Brothers, like those who know how, do you know about Mario Brothers, the game? It's a video game. Yeah, okay. Just checking. So, it's like this I don't want to die before experiencing the world the way I want to, you know. So I think that gives me the drive. But to whereas mountains itself is a very spiritual journey for me every time. It doesn't have to be Everest, or it's just going out there because it really helps you, you know, tune in with yourself and, you know, really do the work, the inner healing work that I've found a lot of healing in nature. Mountains are not just everywhere outdoors. And like I said, I've climbed other big mountains before the Seven Summits, but the Seven Summits itself was targeted towards highlighting Bangladesh in an international platform. And I had already career-wise had, you know, almost a decade of a career before Seven Summits, and I used those connections to rally up my support for Bangladesh. And I worked on several international campaigns actually, whether it was in the Tibet movement, or, you know, the Rohingya refugee movement, or in the Palestinians work, and those kind of, and with other environment work. So I had a network, international network already before going into Seven Summits. Yeah, and I just wanted to say about, you asked a question about Everest, and I touched base a little bit about the Sherpa people, and this way the Sherpa people climb the mountain is very different than how a Western might approach a mountain. And I think this is not just with Everest, but with any, you know, I've been very privileged to go to a lot of the remotest parts of the world, not just the seven continents, but places where many haven't had the luck, like Antarctica, or, you know, not just of humans, but we have to go in there, be mindful of the inhabitants in it, you know. And I think you and I, we're going to talk about this a little bit as well, not just with Everest. It's like, do we go there and honor this Sherpa people's belief? When we come back out, do we actually give credit to the people who has carried our trash? You know, these days we see so many, not just Western and Easterners, like every climber like gets famous, gets book deals, gets a whole career established, but we never hear of the people who has helped us achieve that, you know. And mind you, in 2020, or in the modern age, you cannot climb Everest by yourself. The rope is fixed by someone. Even if you say you're climbing solo, your stuff had to be carried to base camp by other people, and those people need to be honored and give credit to.
No, absolutely. And you touched a little bit about this early in the presentation when you talk about how young people do have that creativity and that passion and those radical ideas to change the world. And you recently published a story for the UN. And in it, you claim how 90% of this training is mental. And to you, it really parallels the struggle that women, especially, face on a daily basis. A lot of challenges are harder socially than they might actually be physically. Now, what systematic barriers have you had to overcome to get to this place? And was it difficult to establish yourself and your credibility as a female in this field?
Yeah. Oh yeah, like not just being a female of color. Like I'm probably in the lowest of the chain, because in the beginning I thought it was a Bangladesh issue, but it's a worldwide issue. Like now I work in the Hollywood industry making films, and you know, even when I was doing Seven Summits, people didn't take me seriously because I was woman. There were people trying to defame me. Some groups wanted a man to be the first person, and then I, you know, just to raise the funds. I've been in meetings where male CEOs of, like, an educated person in a company would talk me via another man, even though we're sitting in a room, because he didn't think I was worth looking at too. And, you know, starting from that experience to being in America, being in a room full of executives, all female executives, telling me that my show wasn't ready for the male audience they had. So I just want to remind everyone that patriarchy, you know, that whole system, it's a system. It's, and women can be, as, or all genders can be part of that system, as men are part of the fight for equal rights. So for example, you know, South Asian aunties consciously, unconsciously perpetuate patriarchy. And I've had more of that in my life than coming from, say, males doing it at me, if that makes sense, you know. So it's a systematic problem, and, you know, I have had to face that from since I was a kid to now. You know, after Seven Summits, I have even been told that now I was, it was time for my 8th summit, meaning marriage. So it doesn't matter how much you achieve in your life, your achievement is kind of valued with who you're married to, if that makes sense. So yeah, I'm still fighting it, and I have nothing against marriage. I have nothing against all that. It's just like it has to come from, and then right now I'm fighting for equal payment in the industry. Like that's also a whole different level of talk. So that I had to fight since when I was at home to now. So it's for women, I think it's triple the work. For a person of color, for African American community in US, it's harder. Like it's but we can bring that change when we put our foot down. And I had to make a lot of sacrifices to bring the changes, because I had to just refuse to sign contracts. And I've been discriminated in many platforms. And the thing is, if you get your standard low, that's how you're going to be treated. So you have to keep your standard high and maybe suffer for a few years, but eventually it'll pay you off.
Oh, that's wonderful, wonderful insights. And let's dig a little bit more into that. A lot of your work does center around doing almost like the physically impossible, but you also share narratives and uplifts others along the ways. You speak, you act, you take time to listen and absorb. How does storytelling really fit into the work that you're doing? And we have one viewer, Jesus Ramirez from Yucatan, Mexico, who's asking if you can please share a little bit more about education programs that you founded and how you're helping pass this mentality on to young females or other generations.
Education programs that I founded or found myself?
Anything. And in what ways are you seeing yourself not bringing others along with you on this journey?
So sorry, the first question was about like storytelling, right? I think, because right, I can't really talk about the show that I'm working on, but part of it is all about saying it from others' perspective. And I think, so for example, when I went to West Papua, which is where one of the 7 summits are, Karsten's Pyramid, I read everything that I read was from a very predominantly Western male perspective. And when I went into West Papua, the journey turned out to be completely different. And it was nothing close to what the stories will tell, because it wasn't written by West Papuan people, So I think it's very important that don't judge a book by its cover. Go there, immerse yourself, live the experience, because there are so many different sides to it. So storytelling has to be done from the locals, like when you go into someone's area, interview enough people, give them the platform to tell their stories. Because when we go with certain ideas, we are basically telling their stories and we're not helping them, and that's not an authentic voice. In terms of, did that answer your question? Sorry. And then in terms of the viewer's question, he asked whether there were courses.
What education foundations are you working with? Have you found it? We talked a little bit about in your presentation how you're working with young women and helping them empower themselves and see their careers in different lights. So where does that work dig in for you?
So the way because we do come from a very South Asian culture. So the way I had to cater to my culture. So the way I curated the courses, I combined some of the Western outdoors activities. So there are many outdoor schools here, and some of the leaders from there actually helped me write the course, but I combine it with a lot of mind training skills, like how do you empower yourself authentically from inside. So a lot of the meditation tools, a lot of the yoga work, a lot of physical work to kind of find your inner voice. So for example, in my culture, I mean here too oftentimes, but especially in my culture, a girl is always told her path. They're not given a voice to choose their own path, right? It's everyone else telling. And I've grown up in it. I'm still in it. Like, even though I'm like almost 40, people are telling me what to do. Like, you should have done it like da, 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 da. This is just our culture. So we teach, or we show the kids how to find their own voice and then stick by it. And also we combine climate change with all our courses, and to be more mindful on moving forward in whatever we do. And I think that's a huge thing because our planet right now is in a critical time. So no matter what we grow as an adult and what we do in life, we have to know that our home, our only home, is running out of time. So no matter what profession we go into, we have to incorporate the planet's life. So there are three elements to it: mindfulness training, outdoors education, and environmental education. So that's how I curate those courses.
No, that sounds incredible. And I want to transition the conversation a little bit more about a lot of the obstacles that you might have faced throughout your time. And we've talked about a lot of systematic barriers, but also you've faced a lot of isolation, a lot of personal internal obstacles when it came to getting through all these goals. Along your journey, what was some of the most challenging things that you've had to overcome? And from that, what were the skills that you learned and embodied to help you overcome those roadblocks?
So many. I could write a whole book about it. But in my culture, especially, I think, like, especially with when I started setting up my foundation, it's it's a very different setting than setting up anything in Western world, because I realized that I had, just by being myself and doing the work, I had automatically made some people angry because it was not translated the right way. So I had to make the entire village in some areas part of the foundation just to educate maybe 20 girls, if that makes sense, because I had to have them on my side. Otherwise, my foundation was getting threats and things like that, you know. And so, but when I made them part of the foundation and, you know, and totally translated to a different language, then they were accepted more. Um, I think and I touched this earlier too, I think it's very important to, one of my biggest lesson is to really check your authentic voice in check, like all the time, constantly, because it's in modern world, it's so easy to get distracted and lose your motivation while you're doing it. And if you remain authentic and honest and humble, and know that there is a learning opportunity from anyone and everyone till we die, like literally we learn, like this is our entire life is a school. And to be really humble and not like think you put yourself in a pedestal, not get swayed by the compliments you're getting only. Also, you know, when someone is criticizing you, take that, welcome that as a place to grow and say, oh, I understand where you're coming from, let me see if I can work on that, or if my nonprofit can be better on that, or whatever, you know, like I'm sorry that, you know, really like question yourself. And yeah, so those would be the main points. I'm sure there's many others, but those are the major ones.
Absolutely. And along the way, you talked a lot about some isolation that you might have felt. Sometimes you are literally climbing mountains all by yourself, maybe with one other person. So some audience members, including Emma from North Carolina, is asking, you know, how do you struggle with mental health along these issues, or when you have a problem in general? Akash from India asks, how do you bounce back when you're having a little bit of difficulty with these issues internally? What do you have to say about our issues with mental health on these grueling journeys?
Well, regardless of this journey, that's a great question, but just let's talk about now in COVID world. Like, I think everyone has a mental health, you know, I don't call it an issue because it's not an issue. It's like we go to the gym for our physical body. We all have a mental body that we need to take care of. And I think society shuns us from, you know, if we cry, we're not man enough. Or if we, you know, like many people have told me, oh, you're a mountaineer, you're Wasfia Nazreen, so this should be okay for you. No, I'm a human being. And the end of the day, I have fear, I have sadness, I have heartbreaks, I feel abandonment. Like I'm a human being, you know. So I think it's very important to be real and like know that we're all humans. We're all gonna die at one point. We're all mortal human beings, and to be very honest with your opinion. And you know, like after I was just telling you I had COVID in March, April, then I had pneumonia, and depression was part of it. I'm stuck in a foreign country without getting access to medical help, and depression was a cause external kind of it just, and I had to sit with it. And I think all those years in the Himalayas in meditation really helps, and my teachers help. But end of the day, I think it's just, first of all, you have to really be honest and sit with it, and allow yourself to feel all those emotions that you're feeling, and that know that it's okay to feel sad. That's normal. It's not okay to just shun that off and pretend that you're strong when weakness is, like, our society has all these labels, right? That, like I said, if you cry, you're not good enough, you're not strong enough. No, I am strong because I have the vulnerability to cry in front of you and express what I'm feeling. If that makes sense. So I have a daily practice, like I said. So when I've hit some rock bottom in recent years as well. And every time it's just, take it day by day, wake up, sit with yourself, give yourself time. And I think in our world, self-care often can get confused with, what's the word, self-consumption. But what we're actually trying to do is self-nurturing. Do activities that really nurture you. I stay off social media. Like, that's my number one thing, because I think people don't realize how much even seeing just random scrolling can deplete you and give you the stress of other people and other things that are going out. And this is not a good time to be on social media. You can use social media as a tool for empowerment, for sure, but the more time you spend on it, it really depletes you. And really, there are studies now coming with neuroscientists who's been studying plasticity and depression and mental health, that really depletes you and is a huge source of anxiety in modern world. So I would just shut off from social media, and if I need to go on there, I do, but I'm not, I recognize that that's an addiction in modern world.
Those are some incredible pieces of advice. Along those lines, Wasif, you also had the opportunity to visit so many countries around the world, interact with so many different people in an authentic and genuine manner. So, given your global journeys, do you have any takeaways about our cultural similarities, differences? Are there any problems that we're all faced with, whether that be in regards to the environment or societal issues? And is there room to collaborate globally, in your opinion?
Absolutely. And, recently I've been working with a lot of astronauts, and you'll hear them talk a lot about how when you look at the globe from the space, there is no border. This is all man-made. And I think right now, 2020, Earth, this is our shared home. And COVID, the pandemic, is another wake up call for us to realize what we have been doing to our planet on a global scale. And this is when we, across borders, across all platforms, across all age, we really need to come together for the health of our planet. And, one of the fundamental, I think, dysfunction of the majority of the education system, I feel, is like we are so encouraged to grow like materialistically, to be like a doctor, the engineer, to have big pay skills. But I wish the same attention was given for us to grow internally and to value, inner values. And to, like, when I travel, yeah, I read about the culture and the people, and I know, but when you go, we're just humans, we're all having a shared human experience on this spaceship called Earth. And so we have to work together. We have to cater to each our needs, and also know that whatever happens to one side of the planet affects. And I say that especially for the American audience, because here, I think, I've traveled around the world, I've lived around the world, but whenever I'm in America, you don't get any news from outside world, and it's so hard to access those things. And my friends don't get it, the amount of news I get, because I have access to that. And it's really scary, because you have to know that there's a whole other world out there, and we're just a tiny part in that whole drop of ocean. um I was gonna um just, but we can touch this later too. um you were gonna ask a question.
No, all good. I think that's really important feedback to take in mind, to be very conscious of what we're consuming and how we're interacting with others, especially on a global audience. With that being said, one of our viewers has a quick question on how we can make a change in this world from home, from this COVID environment. Where do we even begin to get involved? How do you suggest others watching from home, especially youth audiences, to find their inspiration and their support?
I feel so hopeful about the current generation, and you guys are so lucky with the internet. Is like, we didn't grow up with this. You can take so many classes online. You have so much to, like we do too now, but growing up from my age like we barely had cell phones. Like when I go to high school or when I give a talk, everyone in middle school has a smartphone. And so you have access to so much tools to educate yourself. I would highly recommend not seeing, not, I mean, you can see whatever you want, but not putting social media or Instagram or TikTok, whatever is out there, influencer life as your ideal, because that doesn't last too long. Really use your internet to study and educate yourself. Use this time of COVID to really grow your skills. And I was telling you earlier that I really recommend everyone to get a gap year and go travel. And right now you can't travel, but you can volunteer, you can help teach, you can COVID or not, you can volunteer in your own society. You can go abroad, you can work with communities that are less fortunate about than you. Like when people in California complain about COVID, I often have to remind themselves that think about the person who's having COVID in a war-torn area or in a refugee camp. Like, we have so much privilege, and I think as human beings we tend to always focus on the negative rather than the positive, but we have so much to be grateful for. So everyone watching, and I assume this is mostly a youth audience, so I would really count all your blessings and really use this time. This is just a very temporary situation in the grand scheme of things, and we'll come out of it stronger than ever before. But really use this time to grow your skills, because once you're out it, you might wonder, oh, I wish I got that quiet time now, which I felt when things were opening up again. I was like, oh wow, I really cherish those 2 months of just isolation and focus. Now the California has shut down again, so educate.
No, absolutely. Speaking of education, we have so many of our young audiences that are, at a pivotal moment in their time. They're either in high school or in college. So, Wasfia, let's pretend for a moment that you are back in your teenage years, that you're back in high school and college. What would you have done differently, if anything, during those pivotal moments? And what do you think one of the best decisions that you made was for your long-term career?
I would say, I mean, my teenage life was very different because I was pretty much on a survival mode. I had to figure out how to get out of Bangladesh. But for example, I got into a lot of Ivy League colleges, and I think one of the best decisions I took was not, I mean, I couldn't afford it, but because finance was a major issue, I decided to go to an all-women school or college in Atlanta, Agnes Scott College, which is one of the most diverse colleges in US. And just coming to a women's college, really, till today, I value that for my career, because, and especially at that time in Atlanta, this was way back, 20 years ago, literally. The education I got in that school, and it was a private school, but I didn't choose my college up to Ivy League standards, if that makes sense. At that time, Agnes Scott College wasn't that well known. I went to a college where I got one-on-one attention, and I went to a college where women's studies were all inclusive, and it completely changed the way I see my life. I'm not saying that would be your way, but that's something that I really value. I would go and redo again. I got into MIT. I also got into Harvard, but I couldn't afford it. But I have no regrets about it, because most of the education I like life's education I got, like I said before, is through traveling and being with communities and doing, even when I was in college, I had, so my college right now makes every first year college students go on a travel abroad program, go see other cultures, live with other cultures, live those experiences. So I think those are very important. Like I was talking about the gap year, because there's so much pressure right after college to go back to just career, and you have to almost force yourself to choose a career, and you don't have to really, because you don't know at that, our minds are so young at that time. So I think it's very important to take that time off, even not just for college students, but even I know people who are in their 30s or in their 40s going through a career change. Take a gap year. It's okay to go through a gap year if you can afford to, mentally and physically, to really take that time for yourself to seek where your life is at and what you seek and how you want to shape it.
So that's some great advice for everybody. While we're on the topic of advice, what would you say to students that are maybe specifically interested in a career in mountaineering and exploring? Would that differ from anything else that you've already said?
Well, the way look at mountaineering, so it's not a career where anyone will survive. Like, you really have to love it. Out there, you're literally everything. It's not a nice environment to be in. So it's not a profession that everyone survives in. So to know, like, I want most of my fan emails on Facebook is, how can I be an Everester? If your motivation is that, then you can't be a mountaineer. First of all, if your motivation is get to the top of Everest, then please forget it, because that you're thinking, it makes me think that you're coming from a place of to get famous or get your name as an Everester. You got to really love the mountains. You got to really enjoy that journey, and it's not for everyone. I'm not trying to bust anyone's bubbles, but I'm just saying that, you literally deal with life and death on those mountains. So you got to really love it, and really, like, I've sacrificed so much for this passion of mine. So test yourself outside in the outdoors, whether you enjoy it, whether it's your exploration, whether you're a natural explore. A lot of people don't like exploration, so go test yourself. If you like the outdoors, then start from smaller mountains, and see how long it lasts. Do you do good in 4,000-meter peaks? Do you do good in 5,000? So those who don't know, Everest is 8,848 meters. So that's an 8,000er. So it's kind of like being a sorority or that kind. So 5,000er, 6,000er, 7,000er, and then you become an 8,000er. So go step by step. And, in most of Himalayas is, a lot of 5,000ers, 6,000ers are there, and you can it's very, financially affordable, so you can go see how you do in high altitude. You might like the mountains, but you may not do well in a high altitude environment. And I've seen many really world-class athletes come and lose everything in high altitude, because that's a whole nother trip by itself. So you got to really go step by step and test yourself if you love it, if you're in love with it, because once you're in love with the Himalayas, there's no way out, and you're pretty much doomed for life, and it'll automatically flow. But do it for the right motivation.
Yeah, we'll plan those steps by steps. And speaking of the final steps, what does the future look like for you, especially in this pandemic world? Where can we expect to keep up with you? What's any fun things on the horizons that we should be looking out for?
So I forgot to, I didn't forget, but we kind of ran out of time with the presentation. But after the foundation, and while that was happening, I kind of realized that there isn't enough representation of us women in the outdoors world. So I started working on a children's book, which I'm now simultaneously working alongside my memoir, which has been taking ages because of other reasons, because I don't have time. And I'm working on 2 TV shows to both. I can't really, that's one of the reasons why I was in LA when I was hit by COVID, and this is kind of my for full-time part-time base now because of all the production going on now. So if people are interested to know more about, all this work is happening, but it's just going very slow, and it has actually given me the time to focus on my memoir, which I've been working in since 2015. Wow, 5 years. So yeah, on my Instagram at Wasfia Nazreen or on my website, same wasfianazreen.com. I do a lot of speaking gigs, so I might be when things open up in a neighborhood near you. So that's also another way to find more. A lot of them are, posted online. So and on my Facebook, same name.
That is so exciting. From your book to your memoir to your TV shows, I am just very pleased that you found the time to chat with us for an hour this afternoon. Wasfia, thank you so, so much for your time.
Thank you so much.
Inspiring work and advice, words of engagement and encouragement and personal reflection. They've been so insightful for everyone, for me especially. Thank you again for taking the time.
It's so inspiring to see, the energy you have, and it takes me back to my 20s, and like, you guys are the hope of our world. So I'm so honored to meet you and everyone who's listening. So thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you again for those that are watching. Please continue to share your thoughts and tag at Nat Geo Education or use hashtag GenGeo on social media. If you're available this Friday at 2 p.m., if you want to take Wasfia's advice on using the internet for education, join the Photo Camp live session. It's focused on using photography to express your emotions, abstract concepts with photographers Evengia Arubugua and Jorge Panjoga. Mark your calendars for next week, Tuesday, July 13th from 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern Time. Join me for a discussion with Job Majia. He's an international award-winning photographer, conservationist, mountaineer, and upcoming youth storyteller. This is going to be a conversation you, again, definitely don't want to miss. So go ahead and register for it now. And until then, goodbye from me and Wasfia, and stay curious.